Hello. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa barik wa sallim. Dear students, I welcome you all to another session of video lecture series with the subject business law. This is our video lecture number 8. And in this lecture we'll have discussion on the lecture 3 of chapter number 4, which is free consent. In the previous lecture we had discussion on two of the important essentials of valid contract. We had discussion on the consideration, lawful consideration or valid consideration, and the capacity of parties. This lecture will be about the free consent. So let's begin. What is free consent? Before we discuss what free consent means, let's talk about the consent. Consent is basically, free consent means free will. Free will means that whatever you want is from your own will, and there is no external pressure in any means upon you to do that act. So consent, an agreement is valid when it is made with free consent of the parties, or you can say that two or more persons are said to consent when they agree upon the same thing in the same sense, right? So as I earlier discussed, the meaning of consent is willingness, and it should be free in a contract. And free means that the willingness to enter into that agreement by both parties is not with external force or any other stimuli. They want to enter into a contract by themselves, and a contract is valid when the consent of both of the parties is free. And when two or more persons agree on the same thing in a same sense, this is called consent or free consent. Consent is said to be free when it is not caused by coercion. Coercion here means force. Undue influence. Undue influence means to be in a superior position than the other, and fraud and misrepresentation or mistake. So any consent which is due to coercion, undue influence, fraud, misrepresentation or mistake. A consent which is taken by these 4 or 5 elements is not a free consent. It is, the consent is said to be not free when it's taken by coercion, undue influence, fraud, misrepresentation or mistake, right? So in order for a contract to be valid, both of the parties should have free consent. It means that both of the parties should agree upon the same thing in the same sense, without any external force, without any undue influence, without any fraud from either parties, without any misrepresentation from either party, without any mistake from either party. Then the consent is free of both of the parties. When the consent is free, the contract is valid. So what is coercion or force? It's the committing or threatening to commit any act forbidden by law, or the unlawful detaining or threatening to detain any property with the intention of causing any person to enter into an agreement is called coercion or force. For example, you threat someone or you do an action with that person due to which he scares and he enters into a contract in a way that you want, right? So in such cases, the consent of that person is not free. When the consent is not free, the contract is not valid. There is an example. It says W threatens to shoot Mahmoud M if he does not give in his house on rent. So look now, if you see there is nothing wrong, because W is paying rent to M, but he was not willing to rent out his house to W until he threatened, and then M agreed to give him on rent. So it's the owner of the person has a free right or free will whether to give his house on rent to W or not. But here W has threatened M, so in this case the consent of M is not free. That's why the contract is not valid, right? Because the consent of the M is obtained by force. Undue influence. The term undue influence means the unfair use of one's superior power in order to obtain the consent of person who is in weaker position. So by law, contractual parties should be in a same position. If contractual parties, one of the contractual parties in superior position and the other is in inferior position, such contract is not valid until and unless both of the parties they come out of their actual positions, whatever superiority or inferiority, they deal with each other as a layman, as a common man, where both of them have right to show their free consent, to bargain on the consideration, bargain on terms and conditions without any external force, with free consent and free will. Then the contract is valid. Otherwise, the parties are in such a way that one party is in superior position, other is in inferior position. So in such case, there is a doubt that that one of the party should come under the influence of other and enter into the agreement where his consent is not free. So if consent is not free, the contract becomes void or invalid, right? So for example, boss and employee. The contract between boss and employee is the example of undue influence. So boss can take an undue influence and make his employee to enter into an agreement where his consent is not free. So if there is an agreement between boss and employee, so this relationship should be removed first. Boss and employee, they should not remain boss and employee, they should be layman people, where employee can freely bargain on consideration, can freely show his will without coming under the influence of his boss. So if they do not come out of this superior and inferior position, the contract is not valid. Similarly, a situation between a spiritual advisor, leader, and his follower, right? There is a possibility of undue influence. Similarly, a deal between leader and his obedient, his subordinate, his supervisor and subordinate. So in such cases, there is a chance, a possibility of undue influence. So when contractual parties are in such a position, they should come out of such positions, and when they want to enter into an agreement, basically they should act as a layman without looking at their position or whatever relation they are, basically, right? So if such is the case, then the consent is not free. When consent is not free, contract is not valid. Fraud. The term fraud includes all acts committed by a party to include to induce the other party to enter into a contract with an intention to deceive. When you induce other party by doing an act or due to which other party comes into effect and with an intention of your deceit, he enters into the agreement. This is called fraud. When there is fraud in a contract, or when consent is taken by fraud, by doing fraud, such a consent is not free. When consent is not free, contract is not valid. Fraud means and includes any of the following acts committed by a party to a contract with his by him or by his agent, with intent to deceive another party thereto, or his agent to induce him to enter into the contract. So what comes under fraud? The suggestion as a fact of what which is not true by one who does not believe it to be true. For example, when a party gives a suggestion to other party, and the person who is giving suggestion know the fact that this is not true, he believes the suggestion is not true, but even though he gives a suggestion to other party, due to which the other party comes under the effect of this his suggestion and enters into an agreement. The person who has come under the effect of the untrue suggestion, his consent is not free. Another thing which comes under fraud is the active concealment of fact by one having knowledge of the fact. For example, you know about the fact, the fact about something, but you conceal that fact and you leave it to the other party to decide or find out that fact. This is also fraud. For example, you have a mobile, you know that there is a defect in that mobile, but you do not show that fact. Neither you show that fact nor you talk about that fact, but you leave it to the other party to find and then decide. This actually comes under fraud because you know the fact and you are concealing that. So when other party enters into the agreement and later on he finds out that fact, it basically is your fault and his consent is not free. When consent is not free, there is no contract between you and him. You should return his money and get your own mobile, for example. So a promise. Another thing which comes under fraud is a promise made without any intention of performing it. For example, someone promises to someone else to perform an act, and in heart he has intention not to perform it. This is also called fraud. So by this, if you have taken the consent of anyone, his consent is not free. Any other act fitted to deceive, any other action or thing that you do which causes deceit, or you do it to deceive other person, all those acts come under the fraud. So any other than these four, any other things which are believed to be fraud comes under the fraud as per the law, right? So consent taken by doing fraud is not free. So when consent is not free, there is no contract between the parties. The fourth one is misrepresentation. Misrepresentation is basically misstatement of fact about the contract made by one party inducing the other party to enter into an agreement. Now, misrepresentation has three formats. Number one is positive assertion, number two is breach of duty, and number three is inducing mistake. For example, you assert something positively, you exaggerate about something, you start saying positive things about something which actually does not have those. This is called misrepresentation. Or for example, if actually something is of some benefit, but you start explaining more benefits of that thing, which makes the other person come under your effect and show his consent, which later on, when he sees actually there is something else, so his consent becomes not free. Similarly, breach of duty, you do not perform what you have promised, is also basically misrepresentation, where the consent of other party becomes not free. Inducing mistake, you do some mistake due to which other party comes in effect and he enters into an agreement with you. So such mistakes are not accepted. This mistake is also one of the misrepresentation, one of the formats of misrepresentation. Let's talk about them further. The positive assertion means an absolute, full and clear statement of fact. There is misrepresentation when a person makes clear statement of fact about the contract without any reasonable justification, believing it to be true, though it is not true. Like, you cannot provide justification, but you just claim, you exaggerate, right? So such exaggerations in the business dealings are not accepted. So we have to be careful when there is exaggeration from the other party. We have to make sure if that is true or not. Breach of duty. A breach of duty which gives an advantage to a person committing it and causes loss to other person is also form a misrepresentation. The breach of duty shall be considering misrepresentation only when it is committed without intention to deceive the other party. Right? So breach of duty is basically when breach of duty is out of your control, like you are sick, you cannot perform, that's something else. But if you are doing breach of duty by your own will, by knowing all the fact with an intention to deceive other party or to cause losses to other party, such breach of duties comes under misrepresentation. And when there is misrepresentation, the consent of the opposite party is not free. When consent is not free, such contract becomes void or invalid. Inducing mistake. If one of the party leads the other party, even innocently, to commit a mistake regarding the nature of or quality of the subject matter of the agreement, it is considered a misrepresentation. If you do a mistake, whether that mistake is deliberate or undeliberate, but due to this mistake, the other party has come into an agreement with you and you have taken his consent, such consent is not free, which is taken by inducing mistake. That mistake could be deliberate or undeliberate, right? So, for example, you sold a mobile and you did not know that this mobile has this defect, but there was a defect in that mobile, but even though you did not know, and the mobile was, you said that there is no defect in that mobile, and this is true because you don't know that there is a defect, and due to your statement, the other party comes into agreement. Later on, it's found that this mobile had defect before you bought it from. Before he bought it from you. So there is basically an inducing mistake from your side. You had to make sure that this mobile that there is no defect in this mobile before you sell it. So the other party's consent is not free. When the other party's consent is not free, contract is not valid. In such a contract, you have to return his money and he will return your mobile. So, essentials of misrepresentation. Here, what are the characteristics of further characteristics of the misrepresentation? Number one is it must be made innocently, and person making it honestly believes it to be true, right? Like, you cannot say that, believe me, I did not know that this has an effect. So this is what it is. It's one of the conditions of misrepresentation, that Basically, if in misrepresentation, the person does not know about the truth, and that's why it is called misrepresentation. It must relate to the fact essential to the contract. Mere expression of opinion is not misrepresentation. The statement must be untrue. It must induce the party to enter into the agreement. It must be made without any desire to deceive the party. The other party must suffer a loss. Like you say, believe me, I did not have any intention to deceive you, and that's what misrepresentation is. Even if you have no intention to deceive other party, and your negligence has caused the loss to other party, this comes under the category of misrepresentation. And if there is misrepresentation from your side in the contract, there is no contract. You have to return the benefit to that party, right? So that's all about free consent. In free consent, we studied that there were 3 conditions, right? 4 things. Number one was coercion or force. Number 2, undue influence. Number 3, fraud. And number 4, misrepresentation. If the consent of any person is taken by using one of these, the consent of that person is not free. When the consent is not free, there is no contract between the parties. When there is no contract between the parties, none of the parties is liable to perform any action. So if there is any payment from one party, it should be returned to the other party, so both parties comes to the same situation, right? So that's all about today's lecture, which was about free consent. I hope I could have explained it clearly. And if you have any questions, any recommendations, any comment, if you require further explanation about any subtopic within this topic, please get back to me. I'm more than happy to help you elaborate that in as much easier and as much simple as possible. Thank you so much, and God bless all of you.